Hey everyone, Cash Creatures here, and today we're going to be looking at why I've personally stopped investing in Japanese Pokemon cards. So first of all, let's take a look at the Japanese TCG bubble that started to form around late 2022 and early 2023. I know a lot of you are new to the hobby and weren't really around during this time period, so this might be a little hard to grasp, but at that time, English Pokemon cards were seen as being abundant, cheap, and overprinted. And the market sentiment was that most modern English booster boxes were generally not good investments. And this is because the Pokemon company flooded the market with English product to alleviate some of the supply shortages caused during the 2020 to 2021 boom, with COVID, Easy Money, and the Logan Paul saga. I'm sure many of you know this part of the story already. So Pokemon investors back then were looking for the best places to put their money, as you can imagine. And a lot of them did turn to Japanese Pokemon cards. Some of the benefits to Japanese Pokemon cards at the time were that investors thought that Japanese Pokemon cards just weren't printed as much as English Pokemon cards. Also, fans thought that the texture and coloring and overall quality of the Japanese cards were much better, much superior to English cards, that is. And to some extent, I do agree with this point. But regardless, what the market really comes down to is supply and demand. And if supply is far greater than demand, the price is going to tank. And that's kind of what happened to a lot of these Japanese products and cards. So let's take a look at some examples. First, let's take a look at the Battle Partners booster box. This is a recent example of why Japanese Pokemon cards might not be considered great investments in the long term. This set came out earlier this year, and it was massively hyped. I remember boxes of this were selling for about $140. On TCG Player, it says about $105 to $130 at the highs, but I did see some sales on eBay for over $140. Now, this same booster box is overcut in half, and I've been able to find these booster boxes for $60 to $65 for the past 1-2 months now. And it's not just the booster boxes of this set that crashed. The top chase card, Lily's Clefairy, absolutely detonated. This card was selling for about $500+ upon release and a couple of months after release. But then it had a steep decline over the weeks that followed. And now you can get this card for about $150 to $160. This card got wrecked by about 68% in the past 6 months. Definitely not somewhere where you want to keep your money. Our second example is 151. Now this is a great set, and I do think this is one of the Japanese sets that will do well long term, but people are severely underestimating how much of this product is out there. This is actually the set that got me into Japanese Pokemon cards. I remember I was actually buying around this time, around July of 2023. I was getting it directly from a Japanese supplier for about $140 to $150. And on the market, it was selling for about $150 to $160. So I was getting a little bit of a deal, but nothing too crazy. And again, the sentiment at that time was that this product was far superior to the English 151. And now there's a few reasons for this. One of them being that this set has the Master Balls. The Master Balls back then were insanely hyped Pokemon card class. I remember I actually pulled the Pikachu Master Ball from this set, and that ended up being the first card I ever graded. And I got a 10, I was super happy about it. At the time, the PSA 10 in that card was selling for about $600. I think I saw some sales over $600. Again, this was almost 2 years ago now. Looks like now this card is selling for about $300 to $400. And at one point, I think this was under $300 in a PSA 10. So should I have sold the card back then? Maybe. I'm not really sure. I do have this in my personal collection, so I'm okay with holding it regardless of if it goes up or down or sideways. But this is just one example of many that shows how Japanese cards tend to lose their value over time, especially when so much more supply hits the market. Now, if we take a look at the price action back in 2023 and 2024, we can see that near the end of 2023, that's when Japanese Pokemon card mania was in full swing, and people really thought that 151 was the golden child of this era. And, it was hovering right above $200, and we can see that the price actually started to stagnate a bit around this area. And that actually was not due to reprints. That was due to the volume of product that was out there at the time. There was so many Japanese sellers with so much product out there. And there were a lot of US sellers as well who were just hoarding tons of product. So once it hit that $200 price point, that's when a lot of sellers started offloading. So you see months of stagnation ahead. Now, this price decline was only compounded by the insane amount of reprints that they did. The Japanese Pokemon Company absolutely obliterated 151. And this went from a price of about $215 on the high to within the next 6 months, it dropped down to about 60 bucks. And I do think there were some sales like around 60, like even like $55 on this one. So again, there was a lot of factors to why this booster box crashed. A lot of it was Japanese sellers and US sellers just holding back a ton of product. So once they hit a price point that they deemed was a good exit point, a lot of them ended up dumping their product on the market. There was so many sellers at the time posting, stories on their Instagram, pictures on their feed of just walls and walls of this product. Guys, there was so much out there. There probably still is, right? I actually just sold a case recently. I have 6 boxes left, but I did want to get out of some of my position once this thing came back to about $150 a box. I was able to grab some right under $100 a box. I think it was about September-ish of last year. And I made about like a 50% gain on my money and got out. Again, I do have 6 boxes, and I think this set is just so great that it can do well in the long term. But one thing you got to realize is that Japanese MSRP is actually 40 bucks, 40, 50 bucks a booster box. And, a fair value on Japanese booster boxes after having them shipped from Japan, I would say anywhere from like 40 to 60 bucks. Really anything over that, you're paying too much. And as you can see, if you do end up paying too much, you can definitely get burned on these boxes. So the next box I want to look at is called Clayburst. And this is basically one half of Paldea Evolved, of English Paldea Evolved. And this was one of the first booster boxes that started the Japanese hype cycle back in about 2023. When this product came out, there were literally lines and lines of buyers just, waiting to get inside and grab a box or two. Kind of reminiscent of today's market with English. There was a lot of people looking to get this box, buy them out as much as they can, and kind of just scalp them, resell them on the secondary market, just like we're seeing with a lot of English product nowadays. This box went all the way up to about $200 as well. And then from there, it just continuously declined, guys. There's no upward movement in this. On the low side, it hit about under 40 bucks, it looks like. Right about 40, 42 bucks on the low side. We're looking at a loss of about 80% on your money. That is ridiculous. And these are the type of losses that you can incur investing in Japanese product, especially if you're buying too high. Now, I do think that if you're buying at or near MSRP of about 40 bucks, maybe even 50 bucks, there is potential upside, but there's also a probability that your money just goes stagnant for quite a while. A couple good examples of this are Ancient Roar and Future Flash. These two sets came out about the end of 2023, and initially they were super hyped. Started out about $100, quickly went down to about 70 bucks, in the 60s, down to the 50s. And since then, if you bought this box about a year and a half ago, you barely made any money. You probably made a 10 to 15% return. After fees and shipping on that, you're pretty much coming back down to zero, if not negative, if you try to sell this box on like a TCG player or eBay. And that's the real risk of buying Japanese product when the demand is low, is that you might not lose money, but your money is going to be stagnant and it's not going to grow at the rate that it could if you just invested in a different opportunity. And again, now we're getting into the concept of opportunity cost, right? Your money would be better in, for example, an English Paldea Evolved booster box rather than a Future Flash booster box. Sure, you might have made the 15 to 20%, but you want to be positioned in the right kind of collectibles. And I don't believe that Japanese product right now is positioned well for the long term. As you can see, this box even went all the way down to 30 bucks, right? That's under MSRP, guys. 30 bucks for a booster box. Like, that's scary town. These are the kind of levels you don't really want to mess with when it comes to investing, right? The number one goal of investing is to protect your capital at all costs. So it doesn't really make sense to invest in booster boxes that do this. The last point I want to touch on, Japan has pretty much said that they will print whatever they want, whenever they want. For example, last year around this time, we had reprints announced for 3 sets. Lost Abyss, which is the Japanese equivalent of Lost Origin, Incandescent Arena, and Paradigm Trigger. They both make up Silver Tempest in English. By June 2024 last year, we were already well into the Scarlet and Violet era. Yet Japan announced that they would be mass reprinting these products. Around this time, Lost Abyss was about $150 per booster box. And then after the reprint, it crashed down about 50%. It was cut in half and it came down to about $75 per booster box. Now, with the big boom that's happened recently, all Sword and Shield era product has been rising, even Japanese products. So this booster box has actually seen its way back to about $150. So this is one of those examples where, if you do snipe the bottom, you can make some good gains in Japanese product. No one's denying that, but the risk to return just isn't there. For example, if you invested in this booster box at its very bottom around September of last year, sure, you made 100% on your money, which is great. Kudos to you. But if you had just invested in the English equivalent, you made about $300 per box. So if you bought in at about $200, you made 150% on your money. So even one of the stronger performing Japanese booster boxes still doesn't really compare to its English counterpart. And this is why, guys, I stopped investing in Japanese Pokemon cards. I do still have some booster boxes in my collection because I do want to have some exposure to the Japanese market. And I do think that some of the cards do have really high quality. The printing standards and quality control standards in Japan are just much better than the ones in the United States. That's really not up for debate. You can see it in the PSA 10 numbers. The gem rate for a lot of these Japanese cards is way, way higher than their English counterparts. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that the demand really isn't there for Japanese products and Japanese cards. English is by far the most popular language when it comes to Pokemon cards, and I don't really see this changing anytime soon. Japanese cards have always been the cheaper counterpart to English Pokemon cards, and the trend doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. Investors and collectors nowadays are only pouring more money into English Pokemon cards. Again, not all Japanese Pokemon cards are duds. There are a lot of exclusive promos like the Poncho Pikachus, which are all hype right now. They've been going crazy price-wise in the recent past. I do think that some exclusive cards such as these can be plays, but again, the risk to reward just isn't there. And therefore, I would not recommend investing in Japanese Pokemon cards to anyone. But again, you do what's best for you. If you genuinely like the art on these or you like the story behind some of these and you just want to collect them, then of course, go ahead and do that. If it fits within your budget and this is something you truly want, then go for it. But I would not recommend putting money into these collectibles thinking that they could be high performing assets. So yeah, guys, that's all I got for today. Thank you so much and see you next time.